Hello, and welcome to a Honey and Stag event. We hope it's a timely event, and we look forward very much to you participating with us with your questions for the authors and around the topic. But our point of discussion tonight is crime fiction in a time of plague, pandemics, and a population in peril. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome into the studio this evening Lesley Kelly. Hi, Lesley. Welcome.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good.
Great to have you with us for the discussion tonight. And then we have Julie Anderson.
Hi. Hello.
I think we do. Here she comes.
We
Good
do?
evening,
Okay.
Julie. We do.
Hello.
She's in the room.
I'm
Welcome,
here.
welcome. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for being part of tonight's discussion. Great to see
Thank
you.
for inviting me.
You doing okay, yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. And our final author joining us this evening, if we all squeeze in a little bit, let's welcome Eve Smith. Good evening, Eve.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, Jackie. Lovely to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And I should say just a couple of thank yous beforehand. Lesley Kelly, thank you for actually helping us put this together. Fabulous.
I came up with the idea. You did all the hard work.
Yeah, but that is the best notion. Collaboration around these things is always good. And as ever, Honey and Stag, there would be no Honey and Stag without Kelly Lacey, who was in the back room making all this happen. So the plan is I have a series of questions. I'm just going to set some breadcrumbs down for the authors, and hopefully they'll be generating that discussion around their work. Please, if you're viewing with us now, or even if you view later, please put your questions in and the authors will try and answer them now, or they'll come back to you later and answer them as well. So, first of all, what I'd like to do is go around and ask each author if they wouldn't mind, and I'll start with you, Lesley. Would you hold up your book for us?
Here's one I prepared earlier.
That's beautiful. So it's Murder in the Music Factory, yeah? And you're published by Sandstone Press, is that correct?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay. And your book is part of a series, is it not?
Yeah, this is number 4 in the Health of Strangers series, all set against the background of a pandemic. Very timely.
Very timely indeed.
I wrote it and it all came true.
Yep. Anyway, coming away from your crystal ball, if we can move to Julie. Julie, your novel has just that fantastic one-word title. Plague. Thank you very much. You're published by Claret Press, is that?
That's correct, yes.
That is correct. Great. Yeah. Lovely. It's the first of a series. Is that correct?
Indeed. Yeah. It's to be published on the 15th of September. And it's the first of 3 so far, at any rate, following the same protagonist.
Excellent. Nick Mills is just saying to say hi to Julie. Met you on the UK CBC last week. Loved the book walk.
Oh, super. Yeah, I did that. I did a book walk. Plague is set in London. Sorry, I'm monopolizing the screen, but Plague is set in London. And lots of the events of the plot take place within a very small area in Westminster. So we did a book walk with a photographer, and a lot of the photographs have been turned into montages and put on social media and so on, which was great fun to do. And
fabulous. I might come back and ask you some more about that later if we have time. So thank you, Nick Mills. And Eve Smith. Where's your lovely book, Eve? Yeah.
Oh,
yes, the waiting rooms. Oh, glorious.
Yes.
Can I just say, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But you're published by Arenda. Are you not? Arenda Books?
Yes, the lovely Arenda Books. Yes.
Yeah. And where is yours set?
So my novel is set in a mixture of Oxford, London, and South Africa. And it's set during the advent and aftermath of an antibiotic crisis, which decimates the population.
fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. It's going to be a bit gruesome. I know it is tonight, but hopefully our discussions will bring pleasure as well as maybe some trepidation. So my first question that I wanted to put to you, and I don't know, Julie, if we start with you, but I'd like all authors to respond to this and come in at any time you wanted to discuss together, because we're here to discuss your work. It's so important. So the decision to write this topic, why plague? What drew you to the notion of bringing that? Because it's not just about the plague. There are other aspects to it, and we'll come on to those. But first of all, why plague?
Okay, well, when I decided that I was going to write this, I was actually interested, in fact, to write about power. And I'd come across a while ago some research that the University of Lausanne had done into the chemical reactions in the human brain when people wield power. The researchers, I mean, they measure levels of dopamine, the brain's reward system, and testosterone, both in men and in women. It's, not exclusive to men, when people were wielding power. And the researchers concluded that actually the people who most sought power were the ones least likely to wield it for the benefit of all. So there's definitely a link between power and psychopathy, if that's the right way to pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that link quite fascinating. And I was a senior Whitehall civil servant for years. So the obvious place for me to set the novel was around Westminster, because it was a world I was very familiar with, and a world in which power is very obvious. But London, as we were briefly talking in the green room beforehand, is a place that you can't take a walk in without tripping over its history. And one of the pieces of history was the old plague pits. So all this came together: power, psychopathy, plague pits, history, underground London, and we ended up with plague, which is in some ways a misnomer, because although there is a plague panic in the title, when the villain manipulates the public to believe that there is the Black Death has returned to the streets of London, and plague pits are the scenes of various crimes. So the old ancient plague pits are the scenes of various crimes. In fact, there isn't a pandemic in my novel, unlike Lesley's and Eve's. My plague, if you like, is actually the contagion of power rather than any pathogen.
But I do wonder if that kind of plague is even more insidious and devastating than the other kind of pandemics we'll be in discussion about. But thank you for that. So not plague as in disease, but power and how that affects. Thank you. Eve, so the waiting room and the antibiotics, why go down the route of the antibiotics?
Oh, well, I read an article right back in 2015, actually, about antibiotic resistance, which I knew really very little about before then. And it was an article from a report that had been commissioned by the UK government and the Wellcome Trust. And it said that at that time, they estimated that 700,000 people were dying each year from antibiotic resistant infections. And the projection was that if we didn't do something about it very soon, that would grow to 10 million a year by 2050. And, when we think about those numbers, particularly given our new knowledge about numbers, case numbers of a pandemic and mortality rates, they are enormous. And I was absolutely shocked. And so I thought, wow, okay, I need to write about this. And so I did a bit more digging. And I thought, if we did reach the point at which antibiotics no longer worked, then society would have to make some really tough choices. And one of those choices would be, as we frantically tried to develop new drugs, which would only last for a very short time before the bacteria became resistant to them again, probably only some people would be allowed to have them. At which point I thought, okay, so who wouldn't get them? And my premise was that the elderly are big consumers of antibiotics. And so the abhorrent concept in the book is that if you are over 70, you are no longer eligible for antibiotics. And that is actually backed up by science, because the very young and the very old are the big users. And so at the time when I came up with this concept, it seemed a very remote one in terms of probability. But sadly, as we have seen during this pandemic, priorities are made and horrendous decisions have to be made. And so it feels a lot closer now than I hoped it ever would be. So, yeah.
Yeah, a scary choice to make. Thank you. Thank you, Lesley. Lesley, coming to you, and a pandemic before the pandemic, or before this pandemic, because of course there've been pandemics in history, but you had written crime fiction before. I'm thinking House in Trinity. What led you to start a series around a pandemic?
Well, back in the olden days when we used to find, things about pandemics and plagues quite amusing and quite entertaining, I used to watch things like The Walking Dead and, 28 Days Later, all these kind of films, and think, that's all very well, but that wouldn't happen in real life, because in my day job, I work in the voluntary sector, and we spend a lot of time working with people who, like civil servants and local authorities, NHS, all the people who are responsible for making sure that these kind of disasters don't happen. And my thought was that if there was a pandemic, it would be a kind of managed apocalypse. And I thought, well, that'd be a really interesting situation to look at. The people who are actually on the front line of trying to deal with this, and what new kind of crimes would spring up as a result of that. What kind of scams would we see, and what crimes would there be? And the other thing that I was really interested in was what kind of restrictions on civil liberties would people be willing to put up with if it meant that they were kept safe. And obviously, in real life, we've seen a lot of these kind of discussions playing out, and kind of thinking that, I thought that things like lockdown wouldn't happen because I thought people would be much more resistant to them from a civil liberties point of view. Didn't think that, the ditch that people wanted to die in was about whether they had to wear a mask or not. That seems like, a rather trivial sort of area to pin all this on.
Right.
But a bit like Julie, when she said at the beginning there are quite a lot of corrupt politicians in the book. I did think that this would be either politicians who wanted to make a name out of the pandemic for themselves by, what they say on television about it, or people who just wanted to make good old-fashioned money out of it. And there was a bit of an African theme to one of my books as well, which I know, Eve, that how we treat the third world in relation to development of drugs and things. So a lot of crossover, I think, in all three of our novels.
Yeah, very, very much so. I really enjoy those sort of like those links that are there. But I wonder, we've talked about, and we'll come back to it, but we've talked about the main issue, as it were, on the table. But all good crime fiction does just not tell one story. Contemporary crime fiction weaves other things in, because we do like those different strands and things like that. So, Eve, if I come to you, because I'll move the starting of the ball around a bit, what different strands did you bring into this novel? Because it's not just about an antibiotic crisis, is it?
No, I mean, that if you like, is the backdrop. That's the world that we're set in, and it's what happens before and what happens after. But actually, it's a story about family, really. I've got three female characters, and it's actually a story about how normal people like us deal with extraordinary events like a pandemic or a crisis, a health crisis. And the main current of the story is actually about a nurse who works in one of the waiting rooms, which it's nicknamed for the hospitals for the elderly, where people over 70 are sent once they get ill and no longer eligible for treatment. And it's actually about her search for her birth mother. And that is, if you like, the narrative drive through the book, as she goes through all of the emotions of, you know, what it's like to try and search for your birth mother, particularly when she's elderly and probably therefore at risk, and then finding out that the mother that she never knew has a significant history and actually doesn't want to be found. So there's a big connection with mothers and daughters, and Kate's own teenage daughter and how her teenage daughter reacts being in this horrendously restrictive environment that we have seen a little taster of during lockdown, where you can't touch anyone, where you can't hug, where you certainly can't go to a bar and get off with somebody without really thinking hard about it, you know, and what that's like for life as a teenager, when that's her norm, really. So it's very much about relationships, family relationships, love, and can love endure despite these horrendous times?
Great, thank you. Now I am seeing some questions coming in and some comments, and I will come to them. We'll just go round. It's wonderful. It's lovely to see people with us tonight. That is fabulous. We'll just go round and finish this question. I'm going to ask Lesley then to do a reading, and I'll come to the questions in the chat. So Lesley, for you, the other thing, I mean, you mentioned some of them about looking at how crime would evolve within, you know, in the circumstances of a pandemic. Are there any other threads or lines of inquiry that you bring to us in the novel?
Well, the characters in my book, they work for the North Edinburgh Health Enforcement Team, and they're the people that the government has decided that everybody needs to have a monthly health check. And if you don't turn up for your health check, they're the kind of people that come and hunt you down. So surely tomorrow we'll see that being established in this country. And I should say that my books are funny, or at least they're meant to be funny, and the characters in them, in the health enforcement team, nobody wants to be there because it's perceived as, firstly, a not very glamorous job, and secondly, a job that nobody really wants to put a lot of time into because it's a pandemic, it's going to blow itself out, so you're developing all these skills that nobody's really going to want in a couple of years' time. So the humour in the books comes from people being trapped, really, because they start work there, and then about a year later, less than a year later in the second book, they decide that they're going to invoke a clause in their contract that means that nobody can resign. So they are kind of trapped there for eternity while this pandemic goes on. So the kind of undercurrents they're going through mine is it's really character driven, and all the people that have ended up there for a reason. It's like Craggy Island or something. The money was resting in their account, and they ended up in the North Edinburgh Health Enforcement Team. So the other threads that are going through it is what's happening in all their personal life. And two words that don't appear in the book are social distancing, but it doesn't really make any difference to my characters because they can't get laid for various other reasons, not because of the pandemic. So that's pretty much what's going on with my characters.
Or not going on, as the case.
Not going on. Ain't nothing going on.
Ain't nothing going on. No, not at all. Thanks, Lesley. Julie, what about you? You gave us some insight into, yes, it's not about an actual plague and about those power struggles. Are there any other threads you think we should know about?
Well, I mean, like even Lesley, really, it's about the character and characters in the book. It always is, really. In my case, my protagonist is a lady called Cassandra, who is modern and professional, a career woman, an independent lady who's in charge of her own life, but who, when we meet her at the beginning of the book, is actually quite a damaged individual. She had a job she loved, being an investigator at GCHQ, which she lost in undisclosed but murky circumstances. We find out much later what happened to her, and also lost her husband at the same time. And 3 years later, she's living in a flat in South London with her cat, doing a job that she doesn't have an awful lot of enthusiasm for, in a back room where she's essentially been sent to sort of lick her wounds and get over it, really. And when the commission comes along around investigating the crimes in the story, it's an almost impossible commission. It's a poison chalice. She knows this, but she is so desperate to go back to the world which she used to belong to and wants to belong to again, that she grabs it with both hands. And it's about her gradual realization, I guess, that question, what does she really want? Does she really want to get back to where she was? Why? Does she want other things? There is an element of romance in the story. I mean, Cassie is hopeless. She can't make up her mind. She's this incredibly educated, independent, intelligent woman who couldn't make a decision to save her life. Not when it comes to things like men, for example. So it's not funny in the way that Lesley's book is funny, which I do think is very funny. The interplay between the members of the North Edinburgh Health Enforcement Team really made me laugh. Great fun. But there is I suppose a serious point to it, which is about an independent woman who essentially has been stomped on and put down, and she needs to get her mojo back, really.
Thank you, all of you, for giving us those extra details. Lesley, thank you, Patricia. She's read all your books, Lesley, all the pandemic books, and a stepdaughter. So is the next book going to be real? It's a good question. Before we get to that, would you give us a quick reading? Lesley, you need to unmute yourself now.
One of us was going to do that, weren't they?
Well, you've been so good on the moon.
I know. Sorry to let the side down, but I'm going to read a bit from near the beginning of this, and it's set just outside the Scottish Parliament. That the members of the Health Enforcement Team are making their way to the monthly Parliamentary Virus Committee, and they can't get in because there's some kind of incident going on, and they've got a pretty good idea, who's responsible for this. So I'll start in then. What's going on, Cam? Patterson asked as he rejoined them. Stuttle stopped, looking round to make sure he couldn't be overheard. We had a phone call 45 minutes ago telling us to get everyone out of the building or we'd regret it. Bryce. We're certainly entertaining that possibility. Is that another bomb, Mr. Stuttle? The caller didn't specify. And as we know from your spate of calls to the Het, there is likely to be hoaxes as real. Well, at least you've got everyone out of the way. Bernard and Patterson looked round at the dispersing crowds. We haven't. The MSPs are still in there. What? There was a collective dropping of jaws. Why? Because if it is Bryce's work, we can't be sure this isn't all part of his plan. Get the MSPs out into the open so that he can take a pop at them. We can't use any of the usual emergency plans because Bryce is a former... He stopped, suddenly mindful of the level of security clearance of his audience, because Bryce has prior knowledge of them. He knows all the ways we're likely to respond to this kind of threat and could use that to his advantage. But if he has actually planted a bomb in there, they get blown sky high. Whatever we do has the potential to go very wrong. So what are you doing? We're moving them out 4 at a time straight into armoured vehicles. The army's overseeing that bit. Sir, a police officer bounded up to Stuttle. Message for you. He handed over a folded sheet of paper. What now? Stuttle read the note and his face contorted. Carlotta Carmichael, our beloved Cabinet Secretary for Virus Policy, is demanding a meeting with me immediately on the walkway leading to Dynamic Earth. Is she insane? Does she not realise that we're under threat at the moment? She's going to get herself shot. She is insane, said Patterson, starting to run. We all know that. Come on. Bird ran after his colleagues, happy at least that they were moving away from the building. Although he couldn't help feeling this was not an ideal place to request a meeting. The concrete pathway ran along the side of the Parliament building, and apart from a low wall, was otherwise open on its other side to the parkland that led up to Arthur's Seat, Edinburgh's famous extinct volcano. If Bernard wanted to isolate someone and take a pot shot at them, this was more or less exactly what he'd look for. Carlotta appeared, the domed roof of Dynamic Earth Museum looming on her left. She was accompanied by the very tall figure of her secretary, Paul Shore. Bernard had met him a couple of times and found him to be one of the more pleasant people working in the world of politics. Or maybe that was just the way he seemed relative to his boss. Both of them were looking around at their surroundings as they hurried along, Paul with a protective hand on his boss's back. She stopped directly in front of them. Minister, began Stuttle. I can't believe this is your idea of a safe area, Cameron. She pulled her coat collar up to her face as if it could provide her with some protection. Safe area? Subtle frowned. I never said that. Yes, you did, said Paul. You waved a sheet of paper. We got your note telling us that this was the designated safe area. You said to get here as quickly as possible. Shit. Subtle looked round. We need to get you out of here. I don't understand what's happening, said Carlotta. Cameron! Patterson shouted as a police marksman appeared at the top of the steps leading to Dymac Earth. Over there! Both Stuttle and Patterson threw themselves in the direction of Carlotta Carmichael. Bernard looked at Paul, who appeared as confused as he did. A thought went through his head that they should probably get down behind the wall, but he couldn't get his legs to move. His eyes swiveled back to the marksman. His gun was raised and pointing in their direction. A shot rang out, and he heard Carlotta scream out Paul's name. Bernard found himself sprawling on the ground as the body of Paul Shore toppled onto him, a stream of blood pooling around them on the concrete. He lay back and waited to see if he too was going to die. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesley. Thank you for bringing bloodshed, mayhem into the moment. I'll stop with a question actually for you, Lesley, from Gordon McGee. And he says, do you envisage integrating actual Scottish Government responses to our pandemic when writing future titles?
It's such a difficult question to know what to do when I write the next book. And I had the synopsis of the next book written before this pandemic started. But it is kind of, do I continue with the way that things have been happening in my book? You know, we had no mention of things, like I said, social distancing, furlough, schools closing. None of that was in the books. So I do need to make a big decision about whether I continue to apply my own furrow on that, or whether we try and nudge it closer to Scottish, the actual response. The next book that if Sandstone pick it up, that will be coming out is about something completely different. We'd already decided I was going to do something different before this, and it's about a flood in the north of Scotland. So, you know, obviously as my books have a habit of coming true, if you live in the particular village that I'm talking about, you should be very, very worried indeed. But so in answer to your question, I don't know yet.
Lesley, thank you for that response. So I'm going to take a question here from Helen Hughes, and it says, knowing what you know now about the COVID-19 pandemic and society's response to it, how differently would you have written your books if you were starting now? Now, maybe you wouldn't, or maybe you would. So, Julie, would you do anything different now or not? Julie, do you want to unmute?
Sorry. I'm unmuted.
Okay, great.
That is a difficult question to answer. I think my book doesn't actually involve COVID-19. It doesn't actually involve the pandemic. It involves a scare, as I said. So in that sense, I think it's rather different to Leslie's and Eve's, which...
Oh. Have we been hit by something? I think we have. I think we've lost Julie.
Yes.
We have. Shall we? We'll stick to the three of us till we can get her back, maybe. I think we're being hit by some virus. How interesting. Eve, I'll come to you then with the same question.
Yes.
Would you do anything different?
Well, it is interesting because there have been a huge number of parallels with what has transpired with COVID-19 and the pandemic in my book, which is actually, well, there's a number of pandemics, to be honest with you, because it's about antibiotic-resistant infections. But the primary one is tuberculosis, which is an airborne pathogen. So there was it was getting a bit spooky, if I'm honest with you, when we hit March, April, because lines that I'd written in the book, like no one touches each other's hands anymore, not unless they're intimate, suddenly really were happening for real. I did have curfews, I had rationing, I had a lot of things that have transpired. So I don't know if I would change it, to be honest with you, because mine was specific to a particular problem around antibiotic resistance. And of course, COVID is a virus. But what's doubly scary about what's transpired is that actually a lot of the deaths with COVID have been from secondary bacterial infections. And what is actually happening for real now, sorry to scare anybody about this, but is that antibiotic resistance is getting even worse because huge volumes of antibiotics are being used to try and prevent or treat these co-infections. So I'm not sure I would change a lot because a lot of it is actually playing out.
It's actually, it's playing out. Yeah, definitely. It's like, how do you change it? And there was a question further up from Bex McKinney asking, writing, thanks Kelly, how do you force yourself into those very ominous possibilities and enjoy writing the process? So Lesley, for you going into those really difficult scenarios, do you enjoy it? I mean, have you enjoyed creating the series? I think you must have, or you wouldn't have kept writing it. So how have you kept, safe from the ominous? I mean, Eve's just scared the bejesus out of me with what she's just said. So maybe a bit of your comedy could bring some.
Yeah. I mean, it's my pandemic. I prefer my pandemic, to be perfectly honest, because I'm in control of that, and I can make sure who doesn't die from it. Real life is a lot scarier at the moment, but I'm one of these writers who actually enjoys writing. I know a lot of writers say that they find it extremely painful and don't like lingering in these places. But I write about things that, I mean, my books are funny, so I'm usually just looking for the next joke. And the things that I do write about, I'm quite happy to write about. But there are things that I would just find too difficult. There's no death of children or anything like that in my books, which I would just find too traumatic to write about. So, I quite like writing about really dark, ominous situations because I know I can get a really good joke out of it at the end of it.
Thank you. And you do. I think the humour that you bring into that is very welcome. Yeah, welcome back, Julie. So sorry that we lost you. We reckon the government must have been listening and maybe ejected you from the room there. So, lovely question from Susie. Susie Aspley. Hi, Susie. And I'll put it to Julie now that you're back in the room. Are you feeling pandemic fatigue and desperate to write something completely different? Now, the thing is, as you say, your book is not about a real plague, and you've mentioned books 2 and 3. So where are you going with those, if you can say a little bit, and have you been influenced by the times that we're living in?
Well, book 2 is actually not in London. It's set in Delphi in Greece, and it's again it's a murder mystery, much more of a classic murder mystery in some ways than Plague, and it follows my heroine's fortunes and her need to get to know herself, which is of course one of the 3 maxims of Delphi: know thyself, nothing in excess, and an oath is the road to perdition. So in that sense, it's not at all about pandemics. It's about something completely different. It's the development of the character from the first novel. Have I got pandemic fatigue? Everybody's got pandemic fatigue. I mean, we're all fatigued by this pandemic, and of course, it's not over yet, and it's it's horrible for many people. So I mean, any effect it has on me is minor and an inconvenience rather compared to the effect it's having on some people.
Indeed.
Anyway, I do apologise. We had a power outage. Large chunks of South London just went down. So, but we're back up again now.
Wow! I seriously believe that we're experiencing something of the dark side in but that's just my conspiracy theory. Woody Allen, surely not the Woody Allen, but maybe. So following on from Bex's question that I asked, in one word, what do you do to cheer yourselves up from such dark subject matter? Eve, I think that's a one from you, given that you took us into a very dark place with what you said. So long as it is legal and moral, can you tell us what you do to cheer yourself up? Well, no.
In one word.
Drink.
Drink. If I could have more than one word, wine with friends.
Socially distanced, of course. Yeah.
Socially distanced wine drinking with friends. Yes, that cheers myself
so
up.
you resort to drink, yeah. Lesley, what have you resorted to in these months to find fun and delight?
That's a good question, because I have had a lot of pandemic stuff, because as Bex McKinney, who's in the audience, will vouch, we both work for a charity, and a lot of our work is about pandemics at the moment. So as I said, I've been writing about something else, which I think has actually been my escape, because we've done pandemic stuff all day. I couldn't have come home and written about another pandemic in the evening, albeit a slightly different one. So I think writing something completely different, another kind of crime story, that's been good for me. And the drink, obviously.
And the drink as well. Okay, so 2 out of 3. Julie, has drink been your solace during this time?
It's been one of them. I think it's been a solace to us all, hasn't it? I mean, if you drink at all. But yes, I mean, wine with friends, I think is a very good way of putting it. Or indeed beer with friends, I suppose. The other thing for me is I have a garden, so I like being out in the garden, and it's been a lovely summer. And for some reason, it's been a very good summer for gardens. We've had lots of fruit and lots of flowers, and it's all been very pleasant. And of course, once lockdown finished and one could have friends round, I mean, one's garden became the place where one did all the drinking of the wine and the beer with friends. And eating too. So I guess, and indeed writing, because I like sitting out there and writing. So I bring all three together.
I love that. I love the fact that finding ways through this, but there's definitely a link. Not only are you authors, but you like drinking with friends. I like this. Yes, Annie Doyle commenting, I like Lapsang Souchong. Yes, I do. And dog biscuits, but that's a different matter. Now, yes. Kelly, go on, put that question up just to bring us back to some seriousness again. And the question is, how much specialist scientific research have the authors had to do when writing their speculative science fiction? Katrina Farrell, thank you so much. Before we came on into the StreamYard room here, we were actually discussing that and some very interesting thoughts from the authors. So Lesley, I'll start with you and say, for your research, for your pandemic, for that series.
Well, what we all agreed when we were talking off air before it went on, that we've got 2 fake doctors of a non-medical persuasion on this panel, and none of us have a medical background, so we're all completely making it up. But the research that I did, I've got a bit of an echo there. The research that I did was, I was very keen for my virus to kind of stack up medically, so I just wholesale lifted influenza. The particular Spanish flu version of that. So I had to read quite a lot about Spanish flu, and I'll give you some more facts that might terrify you, is that Spanish flu came in waves, the first wave of which was quite mild, but if you got it in the first wave, you had immunity, obviously, to the other waves, and that's the case in my book, that the health enforcement team are all immune, and they got their immunity in the first wave. The second wave was a lot more deadly. So every time we have discussions about what the second wave is going to look like, I think this could be a bad winter. And the other book that I read that absolutely scared the bejesus out of me is a book called Spillover. I don't know if any of the other authors read that, but it's a book about viruses moving from between the species. And there was something on the radio about, I think they found a dog or a cat or something that they thought was suffering from our actual virus, and thinking, well, that's not going to be great when that jumps back into humans again, if it does. So yeah, I did a lot of quite terrifying research actually. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do you sleep? I know you sleep, so that's good. It's yeah, because it's fiction. Well, yeah,
Fiction.
yeah, it's fiction. Yeah. Eve, what about yourself? That research that you've done to be medically, scientifically correct.
Oh, yes, I did a lot of research, I'll be honest, and I am a bit of a nerd when it comes to research. So I tend to sort of find myself in a little black hole, and I find one document which then leads me to another document. So I did a lot. I did a lot of research, like Lesley, about disease and pandemics and TB. And then the other thing I had, which was immensely useful, is a good friend of mine works in A&E, and he was my I use expert readers because I tend to write about things that interest me, but I'm not necessarily an expert in. So I used a number of expert readers for this book, and I'm doing the same for the next. And so I sent him all of my little bits and pieces, and he checked and sort of told me where I got something wrong. And actually, it's so helpful having that, because even little things he said, like, well, no, that wouldn't work, because then give you another idea for how you can actually improve what you've written. So I'm a big believer in that. So yeah, to be honest, I am so glad I am a nerd, because can you imagine if I'd tried to write a book about a pandemic and not done my research and written some very foolish things down, and this happened and I literally came out just as it was happening? Don't think that would have been very good for sales at all, or credibility.
Exactly, and I think it's probably one of those things where you can't just say, but it's fiction.
No.
Like you can do for part of the writing, but not for that.
No.
Thank you, Julie. So I know, as we've said, the story isn't actually about a plague, but you talked about taking that wander around London and the notion of the plague pits. So the kind of evidence that you were pulling out of there, as you know, as you were doing that, was it horrific?
Well, yes and no. It's too far. It's too far away from one for it to be
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
It's too far in the past. But I mean, like even Lesley, although my book wasn't about a pandemic, I did do quite a lot of medical research, or research with medical people, because especially as you know, I was getting to the sort of editing stage in sort of January, February, March. So that was just at the point at which this was coming into Europe, and we saw it in Italy and so on. And like I at least had a little bit more forewarning, I suspect, than Eve did. But I realised that I had to get this right, because you know, that this was going to happen, and that any book entitled Plague during a pandemic has essentially got to get its facts right. So I was quite fortunate. I spoke to Dr. Daniel Carson, who's a microbiologist, who is actually working on category 3 pathogens. And as I was saying before we started, I now know more about category 3 pathogens than I'd ever wished to know in my life. But it was incredibly useful. And it also, for me, helped me sort of put it into context, because it's not just COVID, it's SARS, it's Zika, it's Ebola, it's, you know, lots and lots of these viral diseases. And as Eve said, just talking with people who know about this, you know, who are experts in their field, prompts all sorts of thoughts. Because I mean, I had, for example, my laboratories overwhelmed with people who were coming in to be tested for bubonic plague, Yersinia pestis. And one of the medical professionals who read it for me, an expert reader, said, no, that wouldn't happen, because if this plague isn't real, your GPs aren't going to refer people to hospitals. So their labs won't be inundated with testing, because actually the GPs are the scientists. They are not going to be manipulated into thinking that this plague is real. At which point I had to rewrite because that obviously wasn't working. Whilst I had A&E departments overrun by people who thought that they were infected with the plague, I had to rethink things. And I think that talking to experts in that way really makes you, it's a real test actually of what you've written. It really makes you think about rewriting sometimes, as I had to.
Julie, thank you for that. I wonder, it's a perfect moment. Could you give us your reading while we've got you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got the first chapter, or the end of the first chapter of the book, and this is when my heroine Cassie, she's been sent to Bond Street Tube Station because the work on the Cross London Rail project has halted because of a discovery. So she's going down to have a look at what they found. A thick-set man spoke rapidly into a walkie-talkie. Okay, on our way down now. My name is Bogdan, and I am the foreman. I will take you. They clomped down a set of stationary escalators, and the clanking of machinery grew fainter. Then down another level to the platforms, where the curving walls of the tunnel were completely bare of tiling or decoration, and the concrete exposed. Like an older woman caught without her makeup, Cassie thought, unready to be seen by the world. Follow me, please. The foreman climbed down a wide ladder into the central trench, where the rails would run. Naked light bulbs drooped from cables slung upon the tunnel walls, and shadows loomed, then shrank as they walked along the trench. A generator hummed nearby, and there was a metallic taste to the air. The ground became uneven. Ahead, Cassie could see building workers gathered by an opening. Bogdan led them through into a cavern. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we are now approximately 200 feet below South Moulton Street. We discovered this last week. The archaeologist is here to answer your questions. About 20 feet wide, the rough floor of the cavern stretched back 40 feet or so, about the size of a tennis court. Arc lamps showed shards of broken masonry scattered amongst large, upright pieces of grey stone. The white electric light created slender shadows in the shallow inscriptions cut into the stones, which must have belonged to a much earlier London. Oh! The woman beside her caught hold of Cassie's arm in surprise as a figure rose from behind a gravestone. Hello, sorry, didn't mean to startle you. The man grinned. Sorry, you're enjoying yourself. My name is Dr. Holly Martins, and I'm an archaeologist with the Museum of London. With discoveries of this kind, construction work must cease to allow for archaeological exploration. He rested one trail-booted foot atop a pile of stones. How long will the delay be? Someone asked. That depends. The investigation could be over in a week, or if we find anything of significance, we'll have to remove it, which, given the fragile state of some of this, might take much longer. Not fragile enough to stop you posing on it. How old are the graves? She asked. Anything from 300 to 500 years old. I think this is an overspill ground. Are they common? Someone else asked. Yes, but there's something else of greater interest here. I discovered it last night. The archaeologist chuckled. Let me show you. They followed Dr. Martins to the back of the cavern, where he connected up a light. Cassie gasped as it clicked on. Bones. Human bones. They lay in heaps. Skulls, femurs, ulnars, finger and collarbones, all mixed up with shattered slivers. Some were large and heavy-looking, others tiny, children's bones. It looks like they've been dumped, not even given a proper burial, a man observed. I think that's exactly what happened to them, Dr. Martins replied, and I think we'll find more of them below, a whole pit of them, I suspect. A pit? Like a plague pit? There was a tremor of excitement in the man's voice. For a few seconds, Cassie heard only the faraway hum of the generator. Then people began to murmur. Plague, cuma, pest, plaga, in any language, a word of power and fear. This was news to the workmen, she realised. They hadn't known about the plague pit. Most of them wouldn't have been in London when the last plague pit was found, almost 30 years before. With shocked and angry faces, they surrounded the foreman. Space and oxygen contracted as men jostled at the entrance of the cavern. Cassie sensed the rising panic. Fear, as contagious as any virus, was spreading invisibly from one to another, infecting them all. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. A few moments longer, and they'd be stampeding along the narrow, half-lit passageway. People were going to get hurt. She looked over at the archaeologist. Martins was watching, open-mouthed. Do something. Say something. A chunk of sculpted masonry, part of a fallen mausoleum, lay propped against the cavern wall. Stretching to get a handhold, Cassie clambered on top of it, her head almost up against the roof. She shielded her eyes from the glare of the lamps. Wait, she shouted. Listen to me. Faces turned towards her, and she heard the faint fizzing of the arc lamps in the sudden silence. It's not contagious. The bacillus dies with its host. It's safe. Sigur, bezpieczny, sakar, siguro. We know this because we found plague pits before. She glared at the archaeologist. Haven't we? Yes, he confirmed. That's why I'm happy to work here. You won't catch anything here. There was a general muttering, though they seemed to accept what he said. There's no need to worry, she reiterated. There's no danger. As she spoke, she felt the stone move beneath her feet and instinctively bent her knees and raised her arms for balance. The structure beneath her was shifting. A deep growl of noise began, and pieces of rock and clay showered her from above. She lost sight of the people in the chamber as the light dimmed, then went completely. The cavern wall was collapsing, and the roof was falling with it. Lady, jump, she heard the foreman yell. Against all her instincts, she leapt from her stone perch.
Julie, thank you. I particularly enjoyed the bones. Definitely. And then a little bit of danger at the end there, having to leap from the perch. Beautiful. Indeed, yes, wow. I am aware of the time, and if everybody out there who is watching, and if the authors are okay, we might just go a little bit past the hour, if everybody's okay with that, because there's so much stuff to be bringing out here. So fine, lovely. So I wondered, given the topics, the themes in your novels, and given them coming out now, or even having marketed them, how have you managed? How has it been? And have you had to take special measures? Lesley, I think we'll start with you, seeing as your book was marketed, was it not, before COVID emerged? So tell us about that.
I'll not lie to you, Jackie, it's not been easy. Way back when the first one came out in 2017, it was a different environment. And when we launched the first in the series, everybody that came along to the launch got this little pack given to them. And inside the pack, you get a number of goodies. You get given a set of like gloves to wear, so you don't touch anything. You get a face mask, and you got a little wipe as well. So that was really good. And we had like virus themed food. We had sort of food and test tubes that my friend Martin's a chef. He did all this for me. Things got worse after that in terms of our tasteless marketing. By the time we got to the third book, which was set in a museum, we were giving people a little gift from the Edinburgh Museum of Plagues and Pandemics. She got a little pocket full of posies. And then we really hit a high point with the bookmarks that we gave out. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to read that, but what it says is the pandemic is spreading, don't get sick. It has to be said, these bookmarks have been taken out of circulation and are no longer being foisted onto the public. But yes, it is not easy at the moment. As soon as the pandemic hits, lots of readers were saying, I'm not even reading at the moment. I'm thinking, well, if you're not reading at the moment, probably not going to tempt you back with a book about a pandemic. So it really hasn't been easy. And I'm absolutely delighted that you've done an event like this to help us reach those crazy people out there who do want to read every book about pandemics they can get. I'm thinking of you, Patricia Ferguson. These are some of the best that you're listening to tonight, I think.
Yeah, without a doubt. Thank you for that. I can't wait to see what the next marketing ploy might be if you carry on with this. Yeah, thank you. Eve,
Yes.
What about yourself? Born in the pandemic, yeah.
Yes.
How have you and the good people at Arenda, how have you gone about marketing this and trying to get the word out?
Yeah, well, it's been difficult because unlike with Lesley, who's just given me so many ideas, if I ever get to have a physical launch, all of the stuff that we would normally do, like a physical launch, like book signings, like appearances at festivals, all went out the window. So none of that could happen. So pretty well everything went online, and I'm forever grateful to the blogging community, to be honest, because Orenda Books have a fantastic network, and a lovely lady called Anne Cater who organises the blog tours, and she coordinated a fantastic group of bloggers who, on the build up to the actual paperback launch, just reviewed the book and got it out there online. So it was pretty well all had to happen online through those reviews, through media reviews, and I did get a couple. I was very lucky. In the Guardian, and Scottish Herald did a lovely piece as well. And then it was about once the bookstores were able to open, each bookstore then, you know, took its own approach to what it was comfortable with doing and what it, you know, what it could do. To be quite honest, it was very difficult for them, and my heart went out to the indies in particular. But my local Waterstones, I have to say, has been amazing, and I got all these little book templates, because you couldn't go in and even sign the books, even if nobody else was there. So I signed these book templates. They're like little stickers that went in the book, and they would put them in, and they gave me my own table, and I've just been really lovely. So basically it's been that and social media big time. I think my daughters accuse me of spending more time on social media than they do, which was a bit of a sore point.
I love that role reversal. That's great.
Honestly, I'm staring at my phone going. So yes, but thank you to all the bloggers and reviewers out there, because that's made the difference, really. So
Brilliant, thank you. And for you, Julie, with a title like you've got, and the time that it's going to be coming out on the 15th, have you taken any special measures? And by that I don't mean masking and social distancing, but you know, in order to you know, to have some kind of impact so that your book gets seen and read.
Well, I think I began writing this book in 2018 is a phrase that I have used so often, because one's so anxious not for it not to appear like some sort of, you know, exploitative potboiler, you know, that's based on current deaths, etc. So I say that a lot. Like Eve, I have to thank the online sort of book bloggers and the bookstagrammers and so on, because obviously we planned a launch, that's not going to happen. We planned various events, that's not going to happen, and the signings and the book tours and so on. So I'm very grateful to the people online who read and write about books, and many of them do it for nothing. They do it for love, which is, you know, just wonderful. So thank you to them. I've had to be inventive, and Nick Mills at the top of the programme talked about the book walk, which I did with a good friend who Helen Hughes, who actually asked the question about COVID-19 earlier. She's a very talented amateur photographer, and we did a book walk through central London one afternoon, starting at the Royal Society of Medicine, which was a good place to start. Having my photo taken underneath the picture of Edward Jenner, you know, the discoverer of vaccinations and so on, in front of a sign saying "Sanitised for you" by the Royal Society of Medicine, which is good. And then wending our way, following the course of the River Tyburn, which has it's one of London's lost rivers, and it has a fairly crucial part to play in the plot. But that was great fun, and engendered a lot of publicity, because there were lots and lots of photographs and photo montages, and there will at some point be a video for YouTube and pieces to camera and so on. We entertained the cameramen who are permanently camped on Abingdon Green, you know, College Green opposite the Houses of Parliament, because they were all set up to do their interviews with their cameras, and there were these two women sort of battling around with a little handheld as I was doing my pieces to camera. I think we entertained them mightily, because they were just waiting. I mean, it was actually in recess, so there were no politicians around. Yeah. So they watched us instead doing our pieces to camera. And we entertained a few people in central London that way doing the book walk. But it was a blast to do. It was just tremendous fun and very interesting, and it has engendered quite a lot of publicity and will continue to do so. So I think it's partly being dependent on people online to help you or to help me anyway, and also being inventive. Perhaps not in the wonderfully tasteless way that Lesley, which I just think is wonderful, but being inventive and coming up with new ways of publicising it.
I think, you know, it's a really good way to put a book out there. If you think a little pack of masks and a little, you know, a little bottle of hand sanitizer, you know, comes with the book, you know, you know, crime fiction for a COVID era. I think it might work. But anyway, to be a little bit more serious, or not too serious, I asked the authors if we could talk about, because I know, you know, these stories are dark, but I wanted to know if there was a particular aspect or place, section in the novel that they found really sparkly, that just for them it's like, oh, this bit in my novel is just immense. I'm so proud that I put this together. So, Lesley, I wonder, could you, in the music, Death in the Music Factory, is there something in there that just sparkles with magic for you?
Well, I actually, the bit that I read, and the book is one of my favourite bits of it, and I think part of the reason that I enjoyed it so much is I did some primary research for that, and I took my then 9-year-old son with me and stood at the top of the stairs to Dynamic Earth and to see if I could shoot him from that angle. So no doubt that'll be appearing on some therapist's couch in years to come. And it's amazing what a 9-year-old will do for the promise of, you know, a juice and a packet of crisps and a cafe afterwards. But yeah, I always have happy memories of reading that scene afterward. That sparkles.
No children were harmed in the making of the book. Yeah. No. Helen Hughes again came up with a fabulous idea: free face masks with the book front covers on them. Yes. Yes, definitely. Awesome thought there, Helen. Thank you. So, Eve, for you, what sparkles in the waiting rooms?
Well, I guess what sparkles for me, it's about what moves, you know, what really touches me. And there's a number of scenes in the book that I wrote that subsequently people have told me I made them cry, which actually delights me. Possibly I shouldn't be quite so delighted by that. But it actually made me cry too when I got my trade proof. There were a couple of scenes that made me cry, and I don't know if that's your definition of sparkle, Jacky, but there's a scene that will it work? So there's a scene in the middle of the book that's written during the crisis, when one of my leading ladies goes from her workplace, and because there's basically there's no food. The food, you know, no imports of food. Tuberculosis has spread from humans to animals and animals back again. So most of the cattle and farming stock has been slaughtered. And so any organic meat is really, you know, there's hardly any being produced. So basically, the nation has become vegetarian, whether they like it or not. And my character has gone to get some booty from a interesting character who basically is shooting wildlife to survive. And there's a touching scene, that might not sound very touching, but there's a touching scene where she's just picked up her little haunch of venison and a couple of pheasants to last her protein-wise. And she drives back past an abandoned farm, but it's not totally abandoned. As she gets to a gate, there's a young boy just waiting for her on the gate. And he's waiting because he wants to persuade her to take his mother to hospital because she's sick. And of course, the character cannot do that because guess what? The hospitals are overrun. They can't help them anyway because there is no cure. And the best place to be is at home. With plenty on your own with fresh air. So the character has to try and explain this to this young boy who's saying, Why won't you take her? Hospitals make you better. And there's quite a touching scene where between them, where she has to leave him and she hands him this haunch of venison and goes on her way feeling like another slice of her humanity is withered. And I love that scene. It kind of captures some of the desperation of events, but that humanity is still there. There's still humanity there. Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. That is. I love the way, though, for you, because of the quality of the writing, even though the effect that it has, that is what means sparkle for you. Yeah, that it needn't necessarily be a jolly, glowing. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Mariah.
No worries.
Julie, where is your sparkle? No, not your sparkle, but the sparkle in the novel. What sparkles for you?
Well, I'll tell you, but I just want to say, first of all, I thought that scene in the waiting rooms was absolutely stunning, I have to say, especially because she knows when she leaves. She promises the boy that she'll come back and help, and she knows when she leaves they won't. And I just thought that was wonderful. But anyway, sparkle. In my book, I mean, there is one point late on in the book which I will refer to, but I'm not going to choose that, when there is a very large shock. And almost no one who's read it thus far has anticipated this. And indeed, several people have refused to believe that it happened. So I think that's a sort of sparkly bit, if you like. But I'm going to choose a scene that happens. I mean, my book is set over 8 days, and this happens on day 5, Friday, when my main character and the policeman who is leading the investigation go down into the sewers. Now, you are talking here to a woman who likes sewers. I find Victorian engineering fascinating. On the book walk I mentioned, there was a big picture of me pointing at the memorial to Sir Joseph Bazalgette on the London Embankment, because he was, of course, the person who created the sewers and embanked the Thames. So I'm a huge admirer, and I'm sort of proud of their walk along the what is known as the King's Scholars Pond sewer, which goes beneath Green Park to Buckingham Palace, and then along the Mall and down through St James's Park, and then splits to create Thorney Island, which is now known as Westminster. It's quite interesting. Quite a lot of my readers, the book's been up on NetGalley for a while, so I've had some feedback, as well as the sort of expert readers that we were referring to earlier. And the number of people who say they enjoyed reading that, and then remark how very odd it was that they would enjoy reading about a journey down a sewer. But I think that is sort of, strangely, one of the highlights of the novel.
Absolutely beautiful. I love that, to think of what sparkles my sewer section. Yes. Lovely. Kelly, I'm sorry that if I had my hand on the mic, I'm really sorry. I was just being totally enthralled by the conversation around the sewers, which sounds terrible. Now, Eve, I wonder, would you give us your reading? Is that okay?
Yes, I'd love to. So in carrying on in my truly jolly style, the reading that I'm going to do is from a scene early in the book where we join one of my lead characters, Kate, who's a nurse in the waiting rooms. And it's a difficult meeting with one of her patients' daughter and son-in-law prior to an assisted dying. I'm here to answer your questions. I address her first and then him, to support you in any way I can while respecting your father's wishes. I understand you received the notification this morning. He looks at her, but she is silent. He runs his tongue over his lips. Yes, that's right. He has nice eyes, I think, a deep turquoise like the Alboran Sea, our last holiday before they shut the borders. He stares at his feet and frowns as if he's just trodden in something. My wife and I, we don't believe it's necessary to make that level of decision at this stage. She is watching me, waiting for me to speak. I don't. What I'm trying to say is, well, we feel this is all very sudden. There must be options. He sighs, his pockets of words already dwindling. I mean, he must still be in shock. He can't be thinking straight. I make my move. Mr. and Mrs. Atkinson. I keep my voice soft and slow. I understand how difficult this is, but your father has thought this through. It's not an impulsive reaction to his latest results. He's in pain, a lot of pain. He's been preparing for this for a long time. She erupts. It's his prostate, for Christ's sake. He's only 73. Surely there's something you can do. I don't understand, says the husband. What about radiotherapy, or at least a blast of chemo? I thought they were still eligible for some procedures. Even a mild course of chemotherapy would have serious consequences. He looks at me like a confused child, mouth agape. People just don't get it, no matter how many times they're told. It's as if they think we're making it up. All cancer treatments increase the risk of an infection, I say, trying to be kind. Chemotherapy depresses the immune system. Radiotherapy kills healthy cells as well as bad ones. Surgery opens up patients to all kinds of bacteria. Your father would end up going through some considerable pain and discomfort, including highly unpleasant side effects for no benefit. Without effective antibiotics, these treatments simply won't work. Tears spill onto her cheeks and carve their way down to her chin. I understand how hard this is, I say, but your father doesn't want things to be drawn out. I swallow. You have to let him make his choice. She buries her face in her hands. The husband tentatively wraps his arms around her as if she might break. I feel sorry for her. Of course I do. But these people mistake their passionate pleas for love. It isn't. It's their own grief getting in the way. You were aware of his intentions, I say to them. You were both witnesses to his directive. Yes, we were. He gives me a desperate look. But that was a long time ago, and while we never actually imagined he'd have to. His voice trails off. It's like a swear word, dying. Some people just can't say it. She steps away from her husband. A wisp of hair has escaped from her bun. She claws it back behind her ear. Convenient, isn't it? At first, I think it's her husband she's speaking to. Patients shipping themselves off, unblocking those beds. Her words sound swollen. You have targets, I suppose. Helen, please. He draws in a long, staggered breath. I glance at the clock and brace myself for the next stage of this meeting. Mrs. Atkinson casts her eyes around the room. She gazes at me with an intensity that's all too familiar. We're wealthy, you know, she whispers. We have money. He shakes his head. Helen, don't. She thrusts her hand in her bag and starts tearing through it. We can pay. She brandishes a burgundy leather purse with gold buckles. We can give you whatever it takes. Stop it. Her husband snatches it from her. You're just making things worse. Mrs. Atkinson, I say, stepping back. I'm sorry. That's not only illegal, it's not even possible. I know it happens. You look after your own, don't you? Her voice slices through the room. I've read the stories. I'll bet you'd do it if it was your own father. I don't know what you've read, but the truth is that the drugs simply aren't available. I slow things right down, as we've been taught. We don't have access to them in this sort of hospital. None of them do. That's it.
Oh,
sorry about that. If you were looking a little uplift ending, don't know if I delivered that one for you.
It's not happening. Actually, despite the content, the response is there. Wow, and particularly Emma Lewis Gallic picking up on that line that's there. It's like a swear word dying. Beautiful way to capture that. Yeah. Wow. Indeed. Where do we go from that? That is the question. I tell you what I'm going to do. Yeah, I tell you what I'm going to do for a last question, if that's all right, and just to bring us back away from the brink. I'm going to ask the authors. You can choose me one character in the novel that we've been discussing, and I'd like you to put that character in now, here, as we've been living through lockdown and into some semblance of maybe being let out a bit. But as Lesley was saying, if there's a second wave, what will that mean? So choose me one of your characters, and it needn't be the main protagonist, but tell me how you think they would fare during the things we've been through and why. Lesley, do you want to set us off with one of your team, maybe?
Yeah, I would start with Bernard, who is a very kind of unwilling conscript to the health enforcement team, who was a professional badminton player, and until that kind of came to an end, and then he retrained as a health promotion specialist. So I think he has been preparing all his life for this moment. He is in his element, very, very happy with the idea of telling people how to stay safe in a pandemic, less happy about going and rounding up people who have missed their health check because they generally try to punch him, which is where his colleagues come into it. They're a bit better prepared being ex-police people. But yeah, I think Bernard, he'll do just fine.
Great. So it's Bernard for you. Julie, who would it be for you?
I'm going to choose my villain, who I will not name because this is a whodunit after all.
Oh, yes. Why would you choose the villain?
Well, because he would exploit it completely. He would turn whatever happened to his own advantage. I mean, he'd be investing in pharmaceuticals right now. And I have to say, I mean, because there is a procurement scandal in the book, as those of you who read it will know. Not, of course, that bears any relation to real life. Oh. But he'd be involved in that right up to his neck. He'd be creaming off millions of pounds from the taxpayer, and making an absolute fortune, selling us all those things that we think we need because we're going to be locked down again in short order, I would imagine.
Bernard, the villain, who read the book and you'll find out who that villain is, and then you can decide whether you'd like to be locked down with them or not, or at least know that they'd be surviving them very well. Eve, of your vast array of characters, who would you choose?
For me, it would have to be Lily, who is my elder character, who is a resident in a care home and who has huge fortitude and resilience, and in sort of the face of all kinds of impending disaster, holds it together, has an acerbic wit, which might be at the expense of a few of other residents around her. But yeah, she's a canny lady with a great history. I'd like to be locked in with her, definitely.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, you fabulous authors, I am aware of the time. And just in case any of our viewers or even yourselves have other commitments after this, if you don't mind, I'm really sad to have to draw our discussion to a close because I feel there's so much more in there. I almost want to say, shall we do a part 2? Can we start?
Oh, we can.
Yeah. But Eve Smith, Julie Anderson, and Lesley Kelly, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this panel. Thank you so much for discussing difficult topics. Thank you for bringing humour into this. I wish you all the very best with your books. And people out there, if you haven't read these books, can I honestly advise you to get hold of copies of these, because despite the times we're living in, this is fine writing. These are great stories. They are so gripping, and extremely satisfying as well. Okay, and please, Julie's book's out on the 15th. Okay, get yourself a copy of it, okay, and draw the parallels. Whilst there may not be a pandemic, but draw the parallels between now and the book. Please do. So, from all of us at Honey and Stag, we'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. It's been much more than we ever imagined that it would be. That discussion has just been wonderful, wonderful. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please, if you haven't had a chance to put your questions on the Facebook page, do put them on. The authors have promised that they'll come back if they've not managed to answer now. They'll come back and answer those questions. So from Kelly Lacey and from myself, Jacky Collins, thank you so much for joining us, and see you again soon for a Honey and Stag event. Bye.